Idea of yes, exploring limited. Lauren, can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. So just to continue, as I've gotten older as a person, as a Jew, as a rabbi, I've started to find the idea of treating the days of awe as a time to beat up on ourselves. I'm finding that more problematic, not real healthy, and I think that's why not everyone finds the days of awe that meaningful. And what I'm trying to focus on more is the concept of shleimus, the idea of unity, the idea of reconnecting with God, reconnecting with others, and reconnecting with myself. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about tonight, because I do think that is one of the, there are many themes in the Days of Awe, and in the Days of Awe liturgy and rituals. Fasting, that's very much part of this ascetic idea, one that I think is still very meaningful. We're supposed to refrain from sexual activity with our spouses during the High Holy Days. That's another form of self-abnegation, self-control. So I don't think it's all bad, to focus just on the soul and on prayer during the 24 hours of Yom Kippur. But very few of us are using flagellation whips anymore, but we did do them at one point. So for me, as I prepare for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, beyond preparing as a rabbi, writing my sermons, coordinating with Gordon, making sure those people who are reading from the Torah and the Haftarah, know what they're supposed to be doing. I'm trying to find time to prepare myself spiritually. And because of this Delta variant, and because of the fact that we were all on a real high in June, and I think we would probably all agree we're in a much, much better place now than a year ago. We have these high efficacy vaccines out there. I mean, we're in a much better place. There's a long way to go, but the euphoria I think a lot of us were feeling in June, I know I was, has been tempered, to a great extent by the rise of the Delta variant and, the precautions we need to take, et cetera, et cetera. So, I have felt a bit of a rupture from the community. It's been very hard to do services on Zoom, although I know I've seen all of you here and maybe some of you at home. But starting to do Shabbat services again here, but with certain restrictions, has been really nice, and people have started coming back, and I think that's going to continue. But the High Holy Days, if you all got the communication we sent out this week, are going to have certain limitations on them. And so I feel a difference between June and now, just these last couple of months, and a certain kind of disconnectedness with the community a little bit, a certain kind of disconnectedness from myself, from at least my spiritual self. And what I'm looking for on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, aside from trying to help others to pray and find the experience meaningful, is this idea of shleimut, or at one-ment, or a sense of interconnection with God, with community, and with myself. So that's what I'm looking for. Anyone who's comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear what you're thinking about, what your goals are. I wish I could be a little more specific, but I'm trying not to beat up on myself, as I said, as I've done in past years. And I want to use this year 5782. So 5,782. I want to use this new Jewish year as a time, not to beat up on myself, but as a time to be a little more gentle, a little more forgiving. And I want this experience to be a catalyst for reconnection with this community. So yeah, and I'm just going to repeat what you say, because without the mic, whoever's watching from home won't be able to hear it.
I want to echo your thoughts about being a little disconnected, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to come tonight, to sort of get an anchor around getting ready for the holidays. My personal focus has been around self-compassion and navigating through this very tricky time with a sense of self-compassion rather than I should have, I would have, I could have. And I love the concept of
Mhm. Thank you. I won't be able to repeat the entire thing, but I think you're resonating with what I said and focusing on oneness and trying to practice self-care during this time. I think most of you know I work as a chaplain with the police department. I've seen Jacob there a couple times. One of the things that's happening in modern policing, for all of its problems, and there's a lot of problems, they're trying, the more forward-thinking police departments and sheriff's departments are moving beyond this culture of toxic masculinity and more to a culture of self-care, where because so many officers go through trauma, all sorts of trauma, there's a whole spectrum of trauma, but it sort of goes along with the job in many ways. In the old days, they would tell police officers just to suck it up, move on. You don't need therapy, you don't need counseling, you don't need to practice self-care. Those are all woo-woo, new agey, hippy-dippy ideas. We're strong, we're tough, we don't need that. More forward-thinking police departments, including Napa's, are trying to move beyond that. And so I can tell you, without naming names, I've talked to a number of cops here in Napa who are very open, and I think it's a good thing, about the counseling, that they've received over the years or that they're engaged in, taking SSRIs, anti-anxiety medication, coming to the chaplain, to talk about things, peer support groups. So I'm not here to, offer a defense of law enforcement. I'm just saying that even in an environment where historically there has not been a lot of focus on self-care and sort of the gentle approach to becoming one, even in law enforcement, they're starting to recognize that. And I think religion is doing that. I think it has been doing that for a while in the more enlightened, more progressive denominations, in my opinion. And even in some of the Orthodox communities, we're seeing a lot of that. I think in the more extreme groups of any religious stripe, you continue to see the beating up on ourselves. And don't get me wrong, I mean, some sins are really bad. We've all made mistakes. And in Judaism, there are three basic categories of sin. One is chet, which means missing the mark. It's the same word, chatati, when you release a bow from a bow and arrow, and the arrow misses the mark, it's the exact same word. So that's sort of the most minor kind of a sin in Judaism. We all miss the mark. We forget anniversaries, we forget birthdays, we tell white lies. That's not a big deal. The next one is Averah, which is probably better translated as transgression than missing the mark. It's when we're kind of aware that what we're doing is really not right. Shady business transactions. Give me some other examples of something that you think would be like that. Gossiping about somebody, in a way that's harmful. And then the third most severe kind of sin is called Pesha, which means crime in modern English. And Pesha, an overt crime, that is the most serious kind of sin. Assaulting somebody, murdering somebody, robbery, any of that kind of act, that is Pesha, that's a crime. And, sometimes you do need to be punished when you perform an act like that. So Judaism recognizes there's a spectrum of misbehavior. And I'm not trying to say that we should forgive ourselves for everything. I mean, sometimes atonement is important. Sometimes we need to ask forgiveness from people we've betrayed, from people we've hurt, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not trying to whitewash sin. I'm just trying to say that in general, most of us don't commit crimes, during the course of the year. Most of our sins are a little less severe. And I think for that reason, self-care is really, really important. So other thoughts about what your goals are, what your hopes are for the High Holy Days? I don't know if you're comfortable, sharing any of this. Harriet?
Maybe decide hopefully be kind to myself, be kind to others, thinking of where they're at and what they're supposed to, but I want them not to know that.
Yeah,
And just, trying to work with the business that I like my direction to go. Aren't that, and maybe there's a reason that I'm not aware of.
yeah, no, I think that's good. Harriet was saying that in addition to self-care, maybe working on developing a good practice of caring for others. I assume not just during the high holy days, but throughout the year. And I would agree. And I would also say that Judaism, while it's not as prevalent in the days of all liturgy, it's there, but there's much more focus on awe and on sin and on forgiveness than on compassion and empathy. It is there, but we don't feel it as much with the imagery and the words in the liturgy of the High Holy Days. But Judaism constantly talks about compassion to the extent, I know a lot of people in my world, as a rabbi, as a human being, growing up in Chicago, living in New York, living in Napa now. I know some people who hold grudges forever, who are not forgiving people, who do not practice compassion, empathy, care for others. And as a rabbi, as a student of Judaism, a student and teacher of Judaism, I find that very problematic. Judaism, I just wrote a piece for the J Weekly about this. Judaism doesn't teach collective guilt. We're not supposed to hold 12-year-old Germans today responsible for the sins of their grandparents or great-grandparents during World War II. Even though in the piece I wrote, I was saying growing up in Chicago, I knew people who wouldn't buy German cars, and I'm sure many of you have had those experiences. But as a rabbi I grew up with said correctly, Judaism does not believe in collective guilt. If you are not responsible for a transgression, no one should hold you guilty for something, guilt through association. And that's why in rabbinic literature, there's this teaching. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly where it is. I think it's probably Talmudic. I don't think it's in the Mishnah, where it says that if you have wronged somebody and you ask forgiveness from that person, I don't remember, I think it might be 3 times. I don't remember exactly. So, okay, I see you guys nodding. If you ask forgiveness from that person 3 times, and that person still does not forgive you, you're absolved in the eyes of Judaism and in the eyes of God. And in fact, more than you being forgiven, maybe not by that person, but by God, not only are you absolved and forgiven for your misbehavior, the sin is now on that person for having such a callous heart that they're incapable of empathy, compassion, and forgiveness. If your gesture is genuine, if it's authentic, if it's real. So Judaism has a very strong focus on self-care, but also on care for others. And to the best of my knowledge, I would say in rabbinic literature and classic Jewish literature, the focus is probably more on the care for others than on care for ourselves. That's probably more of a modern idea. Post-Enlightenment, there are a lot of important Jewish and non-Jewish philosophers, psychologists, etc. I'm thinking of a book by Carl Jung, the great psychoanalyst. I've only read parts of it. It's called Psychology and Religion. And he talks about the interconnections between, institutional religion and psychology, psychoanalysis, psychotherapy. And there's a lot of crossover, I think. He talks about embracing the shadow within us rather than trying to beat the hell out of it. Because none of us are going to get rid of the shadow. We all have the shadow within us. We all have those darker impulses and emotions and ideations. So Jung says, you're never going to get rid of it. Just learn how to live with it. Learn how to sublimate it. Make it useful. Fear, when handled properly, can protect us. Anger, when harnessed in a healthy way, can lead to a better world. Think of the moral outrage of the prophets and social justice figures and Martin Luther King. Sometimes there's a place for moral indignation, moral outrage. But I'm digressing, and I think I'm losing my train of thought. It was just about the fact that Judaism is focused so much on compassion for others. I know what I was saying. And the idea of self-compassion, self-care is probably more of a modern idea. You can study medieval and older Jewish literature. You're not going to find a lot of focus on self-care. It probably is a little bit more of that beating up on ourselves that I was talking about before. But, we change and we evolve, and our tradition does as well. But yeah, I think that idea of finding empathy and compassion for others is at the core of the High Holy Days. And I'm bringing in a few pieces of poetry from modern Jewish writers that I'm going to read instead of some of the traditional prayers, just a couple at each service that I think will convey a little bit more of that idea, and we'll get away from some of the classic imagery of God as a king and the book of life and, the angels cowering in fear and trembling on the day of judgment. All that material I think can be very powerful, but it can also bring us back to that idea of, during the days of awe, we need to just kind of beat up on ourselves and not, learn self-care and care for others. Other thoughts about goals or about, COVID or about, what you're hoping the High Holy Days will be for you? What about that idea of sin and self-judgment? The rabbi I read talks about self-judgment. In Hebrew, the infinitive, the word for prayer is tefillah. The infinitive of tefillah is lehitpalel, which can mean to pray, but it can also mean to practice self-judgment, as it was taught to me in rabbinical school. And so this author is being very deliberate in saying, don't just practice self-judgment, though there's a place for that. Prayer in Hebrew can mean that. It can mean self-judgment. And we are supposed to, go deep during these 10 days of awe, and even during this preparatory period right now. But this author, this rabbi, is saying, don't only practice self-judgment. Try to practice self-care as well. Try to practice, connection with community. What do you think of that? I mean, is there a place in modern society? I know in psychotherapy, I don't know exactly, but there, at least in California, there seems to be a trend more toward self-care and yeah. Mm-hmm.
How psychologically does that diminish our capacity to actually feel one another, to feel one another? If we always feeling like we are another or less than, are we become the community? If I have that state of mind, do I then, does that inhibit me to be able to truly be present for others, truly be connected with others? So that's
Yeah. Now, Catherine asked a really good question. If we go back to that more extreme mindset of self-flagellation, I talked about the flagellation whips in the Israel Museum, and beating up on ourselves, is that going to impede our ability to, I guess, develop a relationship with God, with other people, if we've diminished ourselves so much, if we've debased ourselves so much? I think so. But I think there's a difference between self-flagellation and self-abnegation. And when I've read my thesis in rabbinical school, compared and contrasted two different Hasidic thinkers who talked about the concept of Yirat Adonai, the fear of God, or the awe of God. It's a very similar concept to the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. There's a place for fear, even though in English fear is not a great word for it. The word yirah in Hebrew is probably better conveyed with the English word awe or awesomeness. there's a place for that in Judaism. And at least in some of the mystical writing, which I have been very interested in over the years, especially when I was younger, there's a great focus on that experience of awe, of yirah, and how it can break us down. It doesn't destroy us, but it helps to remove the ego that encrusts us, that encases us, that forms a barrier between us and God, between us and other people. So I don't think self-flagellation or beating up ourselves is probably going to be helpful in terms of connecting with God or connecting with others. But I think that self-effacement, not self-debasement, but self-effacement, which I think is more connected to humility than anything else, can actually be a very important spiritual virtue, a very important spiritual value. Judaism talks constantly about humility. The Hebrew word is anava. And without humility, how do we have a relationship with God? How do we have a relationship with others? How do we accept, loving criticism from those close to us? I know a lot of people who can't handle any kind of criticism, even if it's constructive criticism. And I think a lot of that has to do with insecurity. But I think those people I know who are pretty good at taking constructive criticism are humble. They're humble, and they know how to take correction. In the Musar tradition in Judaism, they talk about correction, tochacha, correcting other people, helping, sort of like coaching. You're a coach, Catherine. You're coaching others. And in the 19th century and to the 20th century, and there's still some people who practice Musar today, tochacha used to be translated as rebuke. So if you're in a group with other people, you would rebuke one another with the goal of making each other better people, better Jews. Now it's probably more accurate to call it coaching or offering constructive critique. So I wouldn't want to get rid of that, because I think that's a really important part of the spiritual journey. And I've cultivated that a lot in my own practice over the years, and I have found it very, very helpful. So I hope I'm, articulating the difference between, the flagellation and just trying to, if not completely remove, because that's impossible. How do we remove the ego from ourselves? We all have egos. We all need egos, but at least, keep it in check so your ego doesn't form a barrier between yourself and your community and your loved ones and God ultimately. So yeah, good point. Any other final thoughts? I mean, it's almost 8. I really just wanted to talk about this distinction between tshuva and shleimut, between, the more traditional Jewish idea at this time of year, which is repentance, which can often be, not necessarily self-harm all the time, but kind of self-chastising, and the idea of shleimut, or at-one-ment, or finding wholeness in ourselves, because I think a lot of us now are not feeling whole. We're separated from loved ones, sometimes by hundreds or thousands of miles. We're separated from our community. There's some people watching from home. There's some people who won't come on Friday, or who won't come on Saturday or during the high holy days. And, I don't know who's watching. I can't connect with them. I mean, I'm happy those of you who are watching remotely may be getting something out of this, but it's not helping my relationship other than knowing that I'm providing, that we're providing, hopefully, a meaningful experience for people who are more comfortable at home. But so that's my kavanah, that's my intention for these days of awe, to try to achieve a kind of wholeness, a kind of shalom, a kind of peace, a kind of shleimut, a kind of unity with my loved ones, and my community and my family. CBS is my family. So that's what I wanted to go over tonight. Does anyone have any final thoughts about it? If not, I just want to make a plug. We have Shabbat services Friday at 6, as usual. In fact, I just finished my remarks, my teaching for Friday night. And I like what I wrote. Hopefully you'll like it too. It's a really kind of cool Torah portion, but I'll surprise you on Friday. We have a bat mitzvah Saturday morning, and then Saturday night, importantly for you and whoever's at home watching, Saturday at 7:15, we're going to meet right here, same bat time, same bat channel for Slichot. And we're going to do what we did a couple of years ago, which went really well. Gordon and I will open up with a brief Havdalah service, read a couple poems, and play a couple songs to get in the right frame of mind. And then CBS member Stuart Eisendrath, who is a psychiatrist and an expert on meditation and the impact, and I think he wrote a recent book on it, the impact of, I think he's a retired professor at University of San Francisco, is that right? UCSF. And he's done extensive research on the connection between meditation and transcendental meditation. And we're going to be doing some of that. So it'll be experiential Saturday also. And healing from trauma, from depression. I think his focus was more on depression than on trauma, I think. But so it'll be music, it'll be poetry, it'll be Havdalah, and then we're going to do a guided meditation that Stuart is going to lead us in, followed by some discussion afterwards. So if you can come Saturday at 7:15, I think that should be great. And then, and then Rosh Hashanah is not too far off. So thank you for coming, Marcia, Catherine, Fred, and Harriet. Thank you, Lauren, and thank all of you who are at home, whoever's watching. And I'll see you very soon. Okay, take care. Thank you. I'll put this